Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. Charis is delighted to welcome Tanya Turton in conversation with Dr. Ikeranda Smith for a celebration of Jade Is a Twisted Green. Hailing from Jamaica and raised in Toronto, Tanya is an award-winning entrepreneur, storyteller, wellness educator, and mental health advocate. Tanya describes her calling by saying, "I facilitate and provide spaces for people to fall deeper in love with who and how they are." As a wellness world builder, Tanya takes steps to tell intersectional stories and construct the world for Black and queer communities to feel seen, heard, and witnessed. The book we are celebrating tonight, Jade Is a Twisted Green, is a coming-of-age story about Jamaican and Canadian identity, love, passion, chosen family, and rediscovering life's pleasures after loss. Tanya is the founder and executive director of Adornment Stories, a mental health grassroots nonprofit for Black women, femmes, queer, trans, and non-binary communities to tell their stories through a plurality of creative means while building their capacity. The lead educator and founder of Nia Zamar, Redefining Beauty, an intersectional education platform, a love-centered community, and a space proclaiming freedom via self-care and collective care. Her work centers early engagement, mental health initiatives, and intersectional frameworks of engagement. Mixing wellness narratives, arts education, and mental health advocacy, she offers a unique blend of engaging tools to meet people where they are. So welcome to Tanya. We're so honored to get to be celebrating you tonight. You are joined by Dr. Smith, who is a compassionate scholar practitioner focused on serving humanity through efforts to build and strengthen communities. As an educator, she creates spaces for scholars to excel as global thought leaders by infusing theories that transform environments, by teaching innovative ways to integrate psychology in traditional settings. As a life coach, she believes in helping people reclaim their authentic selves and achieve more fulfillment in their lives. Dr. Smith is focused on efforts that aim to establish safer spaces that support intergenerational restorative practices while developing areas that foster a sense of collaborative care with others. As a queer Black woman, she is committed to creating spaces that promote safety and healing for individuals identified as LGBTQIA+. Dr. Smith's area of interest include gender equity, the predictive measures that class has on educational outcomes, examining family dynamics, and the effects of inner child trauma, as well as exploring the underrepresentation of African Americans in various spaces. Her most recent projects involve creating models that deconstruct barriers caused by trauma that interfere with us loving courageously, parenting consciously, and enhancing the morale of organizations. So welcome, Dr. Smith. We're very honored to have you here tonight. We're very glad to have all of our friends physically here with us in Atlanta in the house tonight, and our friends from all over the world watching virtually. We know we got some Canadians in the house celebrating Tanya in particular, as well as folks from other parts of the world. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Smith, and thank you all for being with us.
Oh wow, I'm so excited. So, to be perfectly honest, Tanya is like family to me. Like, I can't even explain how tender of a spot her whole life has in my heart. And so when she asked me to do this, I was so honored. So I'm gonna jump right in. So, Tanya, Jade is a twisted green. Why now? Why write this book now in your life?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for being here with me and for joining me on this journey. I was just mentioning to ER earlier how we met and how it felt so serendipitous, and so I think that the stars align and everything happens as it should, and I'm grateful for right now this moment to have you here. And thank you for all the familiar faces in the audience and folks who have shown up to support. I really appreciate it. And everyone online, folks from Canada, I appreciate it. So why now? Honestly, it feels spiritual, you know, I feel called to tell this story, and the calling has taken place over a long period of time. I first got the idea to write this story. I was 22, and I think that for me, writing has always been a form of catharsis. Like when I think back to my childhood self, that was something I would do. I would, you know, have random notebooks, and I would write things and make up stories, you know. And so I think writing has always been a catharsis. But in my early 20s, I felt this, you know, feeling that there was something inside of me, something I wanted to tell. And so I started writing. I started writing the early stages of this book. At the time, it was just called Jade. And I started writing those early moments, and the story I wanted to tell just started to like touch the surface, you know? And in writing that story, I got a few pages in and I had a technical difficulty, i.e. my computer broke. And in that moment, I only had a few pages that were left in the cloud, but I lost a good portion of it. And I mentioned that because I feel like, again, nothing happens by accident. I think everything happens on purpose. And so I got a chance to start again, and I think that was an opportunity. And so I sat with this story for much of my 20s. So as I mentioned, I started writing at 22, and I woke up late one night, by 1 a.m. and just had this, I can't explain it, but something literally woke me up, like, it's time to take your writing seriously. And so I started Googling and looking up classes and like, oh, okay, what does that mean? What does it mean to take it seriously, you know? And in that process of deciding to take it seriously, I started taking a writing class, and I revisited this story. And as I revisited the story, there's so much that I feel like I was in a decade-long of life research, life experience research, and so much more poured out of me. And the version of me who was writing this story at 22 wanted to write it as like this, something polished, this like, you know, I wanted to write Jade as like this champion of some sorts. And being able to live a little, when I revisited it, I was like, I just want to tell a few truths from the world as I know it, you know? And I think why now is because on a spiritual level, I feel called to tell this particular story. And I feel grateful to be a part of this moment of what I feel like is a renaissance of storytelling, a renaissance of Black storytelling. I feel like I grew up in a time where everything from music to television to movies and books, there were so many different stories being told, and you know, things started to quiet down a little bit, but I see it reemerging and I see it coming back, and I feel honored and grateful to be a part of the legacy of Black storytelling and to be a part of the renaissance of this moment right now. And so I feel grateful that I was called upon. I feel grateful that on a very deeply spiritual level, it came back to me at this moment, at this time, where I was not so fixed on telling this idealized story, but felt more prepared to tell the truth as I know it to be.
Yeah, I just totally agree. Like literally, as I was reading the book, I fell in love with Jade immediately because she was not polished and she was so honest. And she was juxtaposed, her sister, which, as we know, if you read the book, had a tragic death. And she was everything that her sister wasn't. Even in the book, how they said that, look at my notes, how Roz was love, but Jade was pain. And so when I think about Jade, why was it important for you to make her so unpolished and relatable?
I think the interesting thing about it is that it always depends on the perspective of who you're reading, right? Because so in the book, there's Jade and Rose are twin sisters, and it's intentional because when we think about the heart chakra, we often think the heart chakra is pink. We assume that it's pink. We attach a lot of ideals to that particular kind of loving energy. The heart chakra is actually green. And it feels really important to me because I feel like that speaks to the multiplicity of loving energy and how we can, you know, bring one to the center, say this is love, but in actuality, that love can look expansively, and that green energy is also representative of love. And for folks, I know that we just released today, yay.
Yeah.
So you may not have gotten into it yet, which is all good. When you see Jade through Rose's eyes, Jade is beautiful, you know? When you hear how Rose and Amethyst describe Jade, she is this spectacular human being. And this rawness, I think, is always there in all of the tellings of her, and yet still it's mostly through her eyes that we see how she perceives herself. And I think there are moments in the book where I tell the same story twice from different perspectives, and that's intentional because when you see how she's perceiving it and how she plays the story out in her head versus the other person, we can see that some of the twistedness, some of the struggle is actually from her perception of what's happening rather than what is actually taking place. And I think part of what we see in the story is her journey to giving herself grace, her journey to being more tender and kind with herself. But some of the early moments, she can be a little harsh.
Yes, to say the least. But I think that's why we love her. Let's get into her crew.
Yeah.
Like Amethyst,
Yeah.
right? Vashti, right? Jordan. We got Jits. Let's talk about Tay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Tay. Because Tay shows up early in the story.
Mm-hmm. And Tay's the impetus of the story. We start with Tay, we're like, what is Tay gonna offer us?
Yeah, because Tay kind of takes us on this journey because at the very beginning we see Amethyst, we see Jade, Rose, and Tay. They all went to school together, and so they had like this whole family feel that was really intentional. But what I thought was very interesting is that Jade often played the background of these four people, like of these three people. You know, she was always an observer, you know. And so I think what was really interesting is that she was always observing life. She looked at life from a 30,000-foot view. And so what was always going on in the heart of Tanya as she was writing Jade?
What was going on in the heart of Tanya when she was writing Jade? I feel like Jade is an energy, you know? And she has a certain pensiveness to her. And that was actually an interesting part to write it. Like there editing, y'all, I'm gonna tell you about editing. Anywho, the editing journey was interesting because I was always, you know, trying to balance this idea of wanting to communicate through words how anxious and how pensive, but also pensive as in like deep in reflection she always was, without being overly slow.
Yes.
Because I, you know, when people are reading, they want a little bit of the speed. I'm like, actually, if you feel like there are moments in the book where it's a little slow, what you're feeling is her energy. Like you're feeling how lethargic even she moves through the world and is very aware, is very present, is very much, you know, knowing what's going on, but at the same time needs to live in her head, needs to kind of be in her own being in order to, I think, cultivate a sense of safety for herself. And so for me, often when I was writing Jade, and I think just generally just writing different characters, something that's interesting, they all have their own energy, frequency, their own personality. So it really does take for me a certain level of like meditation, you know, to really get in the head of this character. And I do feel like, I must admit, there are certain characters who borrow aspects of me. And so I think that it's about tapping into that place that lives within myself. And there's complexities to me. And so I think that each character gets to, in some ways, I'm borrowing from them, they're borrowing from me some of the nuance and complexity. And so I think that I have a pensive place that lives inside of me that I need to really connect with whenever I'm writing Jade, and also write with grace, because I think that sometimes it's easy to tap into the dominant story, dominant story as in what we've been told about girls like Jade, you know? And so it was really important to while tapping into that energy, also figure out what does grace for her look like, and how do I write her in the most tender and kind ways that I know how to, while also still telling the truth and not trying to, downplay or like push it aside.
Absolutely. And that's what I loved about Jade. She wasn't judgmental. She loved everybody. She always looked at the world from a lens of, well, let me see, let me consider it. She never wrote anything off. And I love her relationship with Amethyst.
Yes.
It mirrored one another so beautifully. And every time she called her, she was there.
Yeah.
And they were on similar journeys, but very different paths. But it never intersected in a way that it rubbed against one another and made each other feel like that what you were doing was bad.
Yeah.
And they were so honest with one another. Who in your life is your amethyst?
Ooh, we're getting personal. Okay. For me, writing Amethyst was really important because sisterhood is important to me. Kinship is important to me. And that's what has gotten me through. It has gotten me to this point, sitting in front of you right now. I feel like that's what brings us together. That's why we're here together. Do I sound all right, y'all? Because I kind of, okay. That's what is bringing us together right now. And so it was important to write in their story together and how their sisterhood organically emerged, and also to allow for a story where it was centered in love and compassion for each other. Because if I'm honest with you, there are some shows I really love from back in the day, Girlfriends being one of them, but they were mean to each other.
They were.
I was like, why are they so mean? This is not necessary. And so it felt important to write something that showcased our kindness to each other, that we can hold each other accountable. And I makes me holding Jade accountable a lot, but does it with love, does it with kindness, And so for me, I wanted to write that into the story. And I feel like someone who shows me that is one of my really good friends, Pascal. Shout out to Pascal. Pascal and I have built a really organic sisterhood over time, and that's someone in my life that I recently went through a really hard experience, and I don't know if I've been loved like that. Like I think it's wild because I've experienced so much care and so much deep love from so many different folks along the course of my life, and yet still, that was a moment in my life and I was like, oh, this is what it looks like when someone is like, has literally just decided to show up and to take my family as her family and to love us, unconditionally, and to really embody. When I think about sisterhood, I think that, going back to what I mentioned, I think that shows like Girlfriends, again, I love Girlfriends, it's not to Girlfriends, but like shows like Girlfriends are what we think about, and we think that to love each other, to hold each other accountable, to be there for each other, has to have a certain, I guess, edginess to be authentic. And I don't think that works for me. That's not the kind of love that makes me feel good, I like to be loved on, like really loved on. And so I feel like that's a friendship that I have, that I've seen what it looks like for someone to hold me accountable, to be honest with me, I actually had a moment today where we're texting and she was like, I don't know if you're remembering that as it really happened. And I was like, you're right. I'm definitely making this up. You're right. And so I think that there's so many ways to still love someone and to show up for them and yet still be kind. And that's someone I feel like embodies that and who plays that character for me in my life.
That's beautiful. Now, what I love too about this book is how you infuse the fluidness of sexuality. And how Jade had a male friend, Morgan, who happened to have her dad's middle name. And they checked that right from the beginning when they were like flirting back and forth. And she was like, you're kind of giving me Dwayne vibes. And then he was like, well, did you know that was my middle name? And that was actually her father's real name. But I loved how in your book, how you allow Jade to like be curious about her sexuality and have a community of people who were curious about their sexuality. Because I would think that the Black community, we lack education around moving fluidly around all different binaries without being judgmental, even if we don't understand. And I think your book did a great depiction of allowing that to be shown. So what were you thinking when you put that in the book? What was your goal?
I think that is a moment where it's the truth as I know it, right? Like, I think I'm a person who has been queer my entire life. You know, I personally can share that my earliest memory was probably about 5, and I remember telling my sister I like to kiss boys and girls. And so I wasn't even like queer, gay, like these weren't even words in my vocabulary. I just was really clear with myself that the possibilities are endless, you know? And so if I'm honest with you, I don't think that I was even writing Jade in the intention of making her curious. I really felt like this was just an honest expression, an authentic expression. I know for me, but also I know for a lot of other Black women who moved through their sexuality from this place of, I love who I love, the possibilities are endless, and I'm open to that love and the ways that love shows up. And so that feels like the truth as I know it. Being able to write a story about love, various kinds of love, whether that love take place through Jade with Morgan or Jade with Tay or Jade with Amethyst. You know, like there's so many different types of ways that intimate love can show up in our life. And I wanted to explore that, to exhibit that, to showcase that. And it feels authentic and natural to do so. And I think that it's actually would have been more challenging for me, if I'm honest, to try to live in a world where it was one binary or the other, where it was just you live on one side or the other. Because I feel like for me, in the world that I know and the folks that I know around me, our expression of loving is a little bit more fluid in its possibilities, and the love is still very, you know, valid and exactly expensive, valid and real in its fluidity.
I love that. So there was an undertone of grief in this book, but even though it was light and funny and exciting, there was grief happening in this book, and Jade was very honest even about, you know, going to therapy. How important was it for you to talk about being Black, dealing with grief, and also managing your mental health?
I think the therapy piece was important to me because, well, I mean, therapy is important to me personally, so I'll say that as my truth. But I think the therapy piece was important to me because I wanted to give Jade an opportunity to really explore some of what was happening, and I really mentioned in the book that she's at her early stages of this conversation, and her therapist is not necessarily the greatest. Because sometimes I think that as Black women, for Black folks, sometimes when we're navigating therapy, it takes a few tries. It takes trying different ways and trying different folks. But even though she has a bit of a challenging experience with her therapist, she pulls out some nuggets, some strong nuggets that throughout the book we see her, you know, really trying to ground and really trying to be like, what was that to me? How can I go about this? And I feel like sometimes that's what it looks like. It looks like us doing our best to remember the pieces that apply and fit for us. And we're really with her, you know, in her journey of becoming, you know, in her journey of trying to figure out what works for her. Because a big point of the why now in her story is for many years, she just ignored it. Like for many years, what she did with her grief was trying to push it under the rug and try to hope that it will go away and that it will kind of just sort itself out, and then it doesn't. And it continues to build up over time. And I think that the relationship with Morgan was really important because it gave her a safe place. It gave her somewhere to step away from the life as she knew it. Because, you know, as you mentioned, her connection with Tay was so intermingled with her relationship with her sister. Those the two things coincided so much. And sometimes we do need a moment to kind of step away. And I think that with grief, there's so many feelings about it where we feel like either we're not doing a good enough job if we're not dealing with it head on, you know, and we can feel some guilt about that. Or in our effort to deal with it head on, we're not necessarily prepared or don't have the tools. And I wanted to mix all of that in there because I think all of those things sometimes can be true. Mm-hmm. And all of those things do happen. And so in our navigating grief, I think it takes time, it takes layers. And I think the beginning for her was very much, I'm going to push it aside and hope it goes away and try to find safety. And then the safety didn't work out really well. And so she's like, I guess I should revisit this, you know. And so it's important to, again, like I mentioned around sexuality, I think it's important to talk about mental health because it feels natural. It feels like a really, you know, today's Tuesday kind of thing. I don't know that there's a Black queer person, you know, who's navigating life, who isn't in some ways navigating some aspects of how our identities can be activating to our mental health. Yeah. And it's important to incorporate in the story, also to normalize the experience that it's okay that there are things that show up in our life that can be quite activating to our mental health. And that caring for ourselves, which is really what we see throughout the book, right? Like yes. We see a really big journey of Jade just like throwing things on the wall and seeing what sticks and like, okay, this sticks, I'm gonna do more of that. Or someone mentioned this thing, I'm gonna try that too. Yep. And some of it works for her, some of it doesn't. But we see how she's able to care for herself and care for her mental health over time by being open and willing to try different things and to incorporate her care practice as part of her life practice.
Yes. And so in true transparency, I'm gonna tell you, I fell in love with Jade because my sister was giving relationships. Okay. And as a former, you know, person who frequented a lot of relationships.
Shout out to my wife over here. You know what? I feel the same way.
So, without giving away too much for the people who didn't read the book, Jade, you know, as Tanya just said, you know, she was trying a lot of things, but it got to a part in the book where it got good. And she was here and she was there. And, you know, I'm not going to give away the end of the book, but why was it so important for you to allow Jade to really explore relationships and not be tied down?
Mm-hmm. Because we understand ourselves in relation too often, right? Like I think that we see Jade in relation to others figuring herself out. It's in relation to someone that's just like, you know what? That's not it. Like that's not the thing I want. That's not the thing I'm trying to cultivate. There are so many moments where she has to make a decision, and it's in seeing what other folks are trying to construct for her that she's able to better understand that that is not the construction of life that she would like for herself. And similar to you, shout out to my wife as well. Hi. There was a time where I also was understanding myself in relation to, and when I say that I really want to write a story that gave us some grace, I really do feel like I'm talking girls like us, you know, girls like us who in our own becoming was like, I need to figure it out. And part of figuring it out is I'm gonna taste the flavors of the rainbow. Let me do it, you know? And I think that we're led to believe that there is something wrong with that there's only one way to be, one way to love, and that our purpose in life is to find quote unquote the one. And I very intentionally wrote Tay and Morgan as the epitomes of the one, You know, like I wrote these characters in the ways that we construct masculinity and femininity and what we think that the one and a man or the one and the woman would look like. And I know it hurt people's feelings. I've read 2 reviews online. It hurt people's feelings that she doesn't end up with one or the other in the way that they think that she would, in the belief of how they think that she should be. And there's a really, I'm gonna give you a little bit of a spoiler, but there's this moment in the book where she has to choose between doing the thing that she really wants to do, the thing that is going to lead her to catharsis, a deeper sense of freedom, the thing that, you know, is going to allow her to access some spiritual healing via the erotica, or do the thing that Tay wants her to do, the predictable thing. Even I would go on record and say the quote unquote good thing, the right thing, you know, the right thing as we've been taught the right thing looks. And we see her really struggle with that decision for a moment. We see her struggle because in that moment she understands, as the society we live in, the pressures that exist of what she's expected to do, and what value will be put on her from doing that thing, and then makes the decision to do what she wants to do for herself. And it's a really small moment, a short moment, and I think a moment that, from what I've heard, brings up feelings for folks. Because I think it's even hard to watch her do what she wants to do for herself. And I think that's the beautiful thing about going back to what your question around. We see her engage in these different relationships, because in each relationship, we actually see her building up her ability to do what she wants to do for herself. We see her building her ability and exercising the possibility of making a decision, because it most aligns with her needs and her desires, even though it would be frowned upon, even though it's not what we're taught that good girls do, you know?
Absolutely. And it's funny, as I was reading it, I was looking back over my life, and it was even, if you even wrote in the book, the proverbial hoe, the HOE and the HEAUX or whatever, and you normalized it. You like set so many people free, because, you know, I looked at my life and I'm like, wow, you know, I made it through doing just what Jade did, but how much better would I have been had I gave myself grace and was like, just F it, like Jade did, and just threw caution to the wind, and was like, well, let the chips fall where it may, you know, because, you know, she has this moment when they're in Atlanta, shout out to the A down south, and they're like partying and they have this pool party, and she has a decision to make in a very split moment to either go and have fun and explore all of what's going on with these new people and personalities, or go upstairs and go to bed and get ready for a hike in the morning.
That's real.
And so, you know, like our true champion, Jade said, I ain't gonna hold you. And she would have had a good time. And so I was so proud of her in that moment.
And had amazing conversations. I think that she not only, you know, had this spiritual experience, but the conversations they had were freeing for her writing. It freed her to open her mind to what adulting looked like. And there's so many, and I've had moments like that. I imagine you have, where I'm like, if I would have done the quote unquote right thing, I would have missed this right here. And this is the moment, like this is the growth. This is where I'm actually getting to, you know, have the conversations we don't get to have out loud. And I'm glad you said that it felt freeing, because I'm a proud advocate of the hoe. I'm like, yes, live your best life. You happy, you safe, you feel good, live your best life. And so all that to say that there's so much beauty in being aligned with our most authentic self, you know, whatever that feels like for us, and being able to show up for ourselves. And we miss so much beauty in the decadence of life when we're busy wondering how we're going to be perceived, or, you know, trying to be the version of good that's been sold to us.
Absolutely. So you mentioned self-love, Tanya, and I think that this book really encompasses that, because that's what we see Jade doing, becoming, growing graciously on her journey, but really just choosing herself over and over. So like, how do you really speak to Jade really loving herself?
That's something that I, even in writing it, really had to sit with, you know, because just as much as I have the honor of writing this story and bringing this story to y'all and to the world, I'm also a product of the world. And so there's so much soul to us about what the idea of love and self-love is. And there are various moments. And going back to the whole thing for a moment, I also wanted to ensure that I was honest about that complexity, because there was a moment where Jade has a conversation with Amethyst about that specifically. And there was a little tension. I think that's the one of the moments you see the most tension,
Yes.
because Amethyst is, you know, trying to get married. Like, that is her goal. Like,
Yeah.
who gonna wife me, you know?
Yeah.
And allowing for our self-love and our authenticity to look different for each person. And so there was some reflection I had to do in writing this story to not just simply project everything that has also been, like, I've also ingested just from living in this world. And so I wanted to showcase a self-love that was more so rooted in self-love equaling the ability to be authentic and to grow towards authenticity, to be graceful, you know, and kind to ourselves, and to choose ourselves even when we're not exactly sure we're making the right choice, but we still know we're choosing ourselves. And to be open to the journey and allowing it to take us where it may in some ways. And still yet being willing to be like, because there are some moments where we see Jade be like, I would have did that a little differently. I grew from that one, you know, and like all of that is still part of it. I think all of that feeds into this journey of self-love. And I think sometimes I think the way self-love is sold, particularly nowadays in like the online community, the healing communities, that there's this idea of your, you know, perfectly healed self.
Romanticized.
Yeah, and you gotta get to that perfectly healed self, and then you are deserving of all the things, you're deserving of the love. And I really wanted to tell a story where she was deserving of the love right now as she is, and seeing her give that love to herself right now as she is, and still work on cultivating more of it in ways that felt authentic to her.
Absolutely.
And it is a love, like, I think that part of what is frustrating for folks is, from some of what I've seen, is that like there's this idea that a love story has to be between two people, and I'm like, she's having a love story with herself.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's exactly what it was. So Tanya, you are Jamaican born, living in Toronto. And you had so much culture and foods in here. Like literally, there were some times that I was reading, I was like, I'm hungry. What about them? I'm going to Sunday dinner. Please let your mom invite me to Sunday dinner. So how important was it to infuse your culture into this book and really talk about your love of family? Where you from?
So important. I feel like there's many reasons why there are multiple point of views in the book, many reasons, but one of them was I really wanted to talk about what it's like to come of age in Toronto as a person who's Jamaican. And I couldn't just do that with Jade's story. Like, Jade's story is just one of the ways that we come of age, but I try to really give you a glimpse with Amethyst and Tay and Morgan, some of the different ways that we come to be in Toronto historically and also present day and contemporary. And it feels important to me because, quite frankly, it's a little bit of a selfish reason I'm cool with that, is I needed to see it.
Absolutely.
You know, I remember, I'm gonna really go here with y'all, we're having a warm circle now. I remember being an early teenager, and, you know, I didn't see a lot of Jamaican queer representation in Toronto in the ways that I needed. And that, for me, I created a story, and the story was that if I wanted that, I had to go elsewhere. You know, a large part of the story was that it was, you know, in other places, and I needed to go out and seek it. It didn't exist where I was, which is not true, actually. There's a lot of queer folks who are Jamaican living in Toronto, a lot of us. And so I think that the beauty of writing, the beauty of books is that we get to document ourselves into history. We get to say we are here, we exist, and I'm honored to be one of the folks who get to do that. And so I write about it because, you know, now there is documentation that there are Black, queer, Jamaican folks who are living in the city of Toronto, you know, living our complex, nuanced, you know, perfectly flawed, perfectly flawed life in all the different ways, and that we exist. And so it feels important to see representation. It feels important to, when I finished editing the book, actually, my editor wrote me this really beautiful note and, you know, painted this picture of my book being, you know, in the library somewhere, and, you know, this young person stumbling upon it and finding it and, you know, seeing their own existence for it. And that's the reason. It's for me, and it's also for all the me's who are coming up, you know, and hopefully they get to stumble upon it and see and feel validated that we exist. And so for me, storytelling in all of its forms, in particular in writing, is a way that we document ourselves.
Absolutely. That's so beautiful. Now, one character that we almost skipped now. Maybe you know who I'm getting ready to say. Allison. Allison. You know, Jade met her right when she entered into Atlanta, just by virtue of minding her own Black-owned business. And she immediately changed gears. It was no longer about what she had come there for, but she was like, in addition to, I'm going to explore the possibility of where this can go.
Doesn't Atlanta do that to you, though?
It does.
I was living my life, y'all. I was living my life.
So I wanted to know about Allison.
You can get to Allison. Allison's a beauty. One, I made Allison really straightforward because I'm gonna let y'all know, when I got here, I was like, oh, when people want to talk to you, they talk to you. That's different. That's a different cultural experience. I'm not gonna lie. In Toronto, that doesn't happen. And so one of my experiences in being in Atlanta, I was like, oh, if someone's filming you, they're gonna let you know. Okay, so Allison gonna let her know.
Yes.
But Allison's also one of the characters she's also in her 20s, but she's a little bit older. You know, one of the few characters, she's a little bit older, and I think is a little less pressed. And I do think that there is a joy sometimes, and I don't know if y'all ever met somebody or, you know, been relating to somebody who's a little less pressed, who's actually made that, and they're not pressedness, you're like, oh, I can just be. Because you don't want nothing from, you don't, because one of the struggles that Jade navigates is everyone wants something to have a construct, an idea of who she should be, of what her kind of womanhood is, and, you know, it is a breath of fresh air for her to engage with someone, to connect with somebody who simply is like, as you are, what's up? Like, I'm not trying to make you nothing. I don't even think that we're just gonna have a good time, and that's okay. And I think that it frees her to start to have honest conversation, because pretty early on, she gets real honest with Allison about what it is, what it ain't, where we're at, in a beautiful way that allows them to cultivate intimacy, but also a friendship. They truly start to build a friendship very early on in their connection, and I think that friendship evolves. And, you know, when you read through the book, you'll see how it evolves, but it definitely evolves.
Yeah, it did. I really enjoyed that at the end. Now, Tanya, how much of this story mirrors your life? Because one scene in there, I was like, I don't know, I didn't see Tanya in that outfit. The velvet green dress, the
What
dark
I'm wearing right
margins.
now, the velvet dress I'm wearing right now.
I said the dark margins with the
Yeah.
split up side.
Mhm.
I'm like,
I definitely borrowed quite a bit. You know, honestly, the beauty about fiction is you get to write things as you wish they would be.
yes.
You know, write things as you hope. You know, there's a beautiful, I think at least beautiful scene where Jade starts to talk about her, not even intentionally talk about, but she talks about what kind of women she likes in her mother, very casually, but like very subversively. I think it's beautiful, and which is why I like to call it a coming in, not a coming out. And to me, that's a scene that I wrote as I hope things to be, as I wish they were, and I think it is for some. And so there are moments where it's not. There are many moments that are, you know, deeply rooted in fiction and deeply rooted in me taking a lot of liberties in storytelling and being intentional in storytelling. And yes, I did borrow a few moments from my own experiences, and I think not necessarily moments as in like a direct depiction, but moments as in the way I describe Atlanta. Like I describe Atlanta and how I felt when I first arrived. You know, there's a moment where they first get off the flight, and that was a moment for me. I remember my first time flying to Atlanta, we had a black pilot, and I was like, oh my gosh, they got black pilots. Like, you know, that I was walking to the airport, everybody was black. I was like, what? And so there are moments like that that you see in the book that are very much rooted in my own real life experiences. And so it's a little bit of, you know, a little bit of A, a little bit of B, some writing things in fictitious ways to build on them, and definitely some borrowing of truths as I know it and sharing them very vulnerably with the world.
Yeah. So my last question is, what was the theme that drew all those relationships together, and what do you hope for people to take away after reading this book?
The theme that brought Nashville separately. So in terms of the theme that brought all the issues together, I really thought the multiple perspectives was important, because even though particular characters are written in a way that idealizes them, you know, in a way that allows them to be the perfect depiction of, you know, manhood, womanhood, so on and so forth, in the ways that we've been taught. I also wanted to show that there's complexity and nuance, right? Like if we take Morgan, for instance, we get to see Morgan's point of trauma in the early stages of that chapter, and how that trauma is very much influencing how Morgan is relating to Jade and what he desires from her. And we also see that for, you know, Amethyst as well as for Tay. And so what weaves their stories together is that they're all in a process of becoming, that even the characters that we think, you know, that play it so well, that have figured out the scripts, you know, has figured out what to say, what to do, they're also still figuring things out, and they're also still in a process of healing from their moments of trauma and how that shows up in their life and the decisions that they're making. And so what weaves all of these characters together is that they're all in the stage of becoming of their life, and they're all figuring out what caring for themselves and loving themselves looks like. And they support each other in doing that, even unintentionally, right? Like we see as Jade chooses herself more, we see Tay get the freedom to also do the same. When we see her start to be more expansive in what she thinks the possibilities could look like, and would she have done that if she had not been in a relationship to someone who had been in their process of figuring that out. And so I think that's what weaves all of their stories together. And what was the second part of your question? Forgive me.
What would you like people to take away after they read this book?
I feel like I've said the word grace a lot in this conversation. And so I feel like grace really is a theme. Although the book definitely touches on grief in many ways, I don't think that that is the most important piece for me. I actually think that it's the ways in which the characters hold each other with love, with grace, and how they all continue to, you know, evolve closer to themselves in that process. And so I hope that through reading it, you know, as you mentioned, you saw some freedom in it, that folks get to read it and feel some affirmation, and through that affirmation, feel a little bit more grace for themselves.
Yeah, this was such a beautiful book, and I want to give this to all the young women in my life, because to me, this was like a roadmap. It was permission for every young woman to allow herself to just be, even in the moments of figuring things out. And so, like, I totally loved it, and I feel like that your book was, like you said, not only a coming in, but a roadmap for all the people that are coming behind you. So thank you for sharing this book with the world.
Thank you. I'm gonna read a small excerpt for y'all before we move to questions. Just for a vibe of the Atlanta, you know. For a moment, this new group of friends felt familiar to Jade. Under the Atlanta sun, the October air felt like July. The trees swayed over the fence. The birds danced in the air. Cold water cooled their feet. Time moved leisurely in the south. It made space for intricate feelings. The quick buzzing movements of Toronto often brought premature climax and surface connection. Atlanta had already proven itself different. The air was sexy, drinks poured slower, emotions and connections built in gradual succession. A few hours in and Jade had begun feeling a catalyst of energy buzzing inside her heart chakra. For this trip, she wanted to see what a weekend filled with laughter, secret sharing, and friendship could feel like. Jade, you're really tatted. Vashti's sheer white sarong swayed as she exited the French doors to join the party. What your back say? Wait, bring another bottle, Amani yelled before Vashti could get in the pool. Jade stood at the front of the pool as if it were a runway, contouring her body like a muscle builder's. Her one-piece swimsuit was black and backless. She showed off her back tattoo while reciting her favorite quote running down the center. The wound is the place where the light enters you, Rumi. While the trip was technically for Amethyst's benefit, they all enjoyed the beauty of feeling carefree for a few hours. No one was sad or worried about rent, boyfriends, girlfriends, or parents. For a moment in time, they were young, carefree, and at peace. Back in Toronto, it was starting to get cold. The sun was going down early, and the fall would demand so much of each of them. Jobs, evening classes, immigrant parents who need help checking emails or help with bills. But Atlanta was slow. The sun still shone into the evening like a glorious beacon from some mysteriously beautiful place that existed beyond the fluffy white clouds. The feeling of not being too old nor too young was rare. Like Goldilocks in the house she invaded, this city made them feel just right. And that moment I wrote, actually took a while to write that piece because I really had to be like, what was I like when I just got here? You know, I'm reminiscing on this before we close because I remember just getting here at 26, not much older than Jade, and I remember this feeling of like, how is it so? I got here in the winter now, and I was like, how is it so warm?
That was a warm winter.
What? Like, it's so nice out. I can have my skin out in the winter, and that felt glorious. But I think not only was it the weather that felt warm, it was the people. And so I'm continuously grateful for folks who, you know, held me with love and compassion as my little young 20-something-year-old self got off the plane. And to be here right now in this moment feels really full circle for me to celebrate the publishing day of my first novel in, you know, a bookstore that I remember being 20-something, stumbling into being like, oh, I'm awkward, but I'm here. And so to be here right now, I'm completely completely honored and grateful, and I continue to thank you all for loving me through this process and continuing to, offer your warmth and grace.
Thank you for sharing. We love you, and this is great.
We have a question from Leslie that's kind of related. So Leslie says, is there any element or portion of the book that you were hesitant or even resistant to originally include? And if so, what compelled you to move forward and include it?
Ooh, Leslie coming through with questions. Ooh. So there's this scene that happens in the shower.
I know.
That I was actually a little nervous to write because I was like how gay am I gonna make this book? Like, what are we gonna do? I'm not gonna lie, I was a little nervous to write that. But funny enough, that is one of the, when folks mention a book to me, I often, that is a scene that comes up and they're like, oh, I'm having feelings about this one.
You did that.
So I was scared to write that scene. I really was scared to write the shower scene, but I'm glad that I was scared to write it and it felt integral. Once I wrote it, I remember sharing with Danielle, being like, I don't know if I can send this to them, and she was like, nah, you have to. You have to. And so once I wrote it, it stuck. It was like, we're attached to the scene is happening. But I definitely felt, I think, some reservations of how the book and also just, the character would be perceived through that scene, because I think it's a complicated one, but it is integral to the story that's being told.
I love that scene because I think it spoke to so much of who you are, and it was just enough. It was a beautiful scene.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to ask our local audience if folks have any questions they want to share before we close out.
I got a question for the author.
Use the mic.
I get to use the mic. Listen, I don't even have to tell you that I absolutely adore you. I think you're brilliant, and I'm lucky to be a part in it. And I get to see you. I get to see you do the work that you do in our community. I get to see you put your heart in a good port. All of you do. I will not lie to y'all. This is someone who actually leads with the heart, and is teaching me how to do more of it as well. And I want to know, I saw this book, I saw you wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, scare the hell out of me, I gotta write this down. I'm thinking of this, I gotta do this. I saw the mad scientist going through sometimes where I thought she was losing your damn mind. But I see what was a result of that. And I wonder, what would you say to that 22-year-old someone who's out there now trying to figure out how to take their writing seriously?
Thank you for that question. I really nice to what would I say? I think I would say you have time. I think that there were moments where I felt so much pressure, pressure even from myself, I won't lie to y'all. When I lost that first version of the book, I really had a moment with myself. I really was like, oh, you did this thing bad. You did the wrong thing. And it wasn't until years later that I can look back and be like, oh, you all right. It's okay. Everything in its time. And so if I could go back to myself, that 22-year-old version of myself, what I would request is to allow yourself the space and the time, allow yourself to organically, show up to this calling. And I think that there's a fear that the calling would go away. There's a fear that if you don't do it right now, you don't do it a specific way, or you don't do it in a way that, you think other folks will love, which I think is an interesting thing about writing. I use I get to very loosely in this instance, but I got to write this book that really centered grief while in a stage of grief. And so I think before that, when I wrote, I often thought about what others would like what would land for other people would land for the reader of the audience. But something about grief is makes you just not give up. Like you're just like, I don't even care. Like I'm writing because I need this. Like this is my catharsis. Like I'm writing because this is what's keeping me alive.
Yes.
This is what's keeping me going. So I'm about to write. And so I think writing from that place, I saw myself become in tune, in love, you know, in joy and in playfulness, like with the actual process itself of writing. And I think that it came to me in a challenging way, like it was challenging to come to it through, you know, the gateway of grief. Because like, I would honestly say continuing to write this book through that process was helpful for me. I needed it at the time. And in previous times, I think that making it about the end process or making it about the experience of others actually took away from me having that experience. And so I really want to encourage my younger self to know that you have time, and because you have time, you can really enjoy this process and take your time with it and let it be for you.
Thank you.
It's beautiful.
She's smart.
You're kind, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. We're really honored that you are celebrating your book here at Charis. And we want to say thank you to all our friends watching virtually at home. We appreciate you being part of our hybrid experiment. You can click the teal button to buy Jade Is a Twisted Green from Charis right now. Get your copy, and if we still have some copies left over at the end of the night, they'll be signed. So go ahead and order it right now. If you want to support the work of Charis Circle, you can press this donate button. It really does help us when you support this work. It helps us pay for this platform and allows us to do as many events and programs as we do. So we're going to say goodnight to our virtual friends.